Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Accelerator Podcast. Michael Pett, retired disabled veteran in the United States Army, transition subject matter expert, and program builder for tech and consulting companies around all things armed forces related. I am here with the co-host, Emily. Emily, over to you.
Hey everybody, I'm Emily King-Grandinetta, author of the book At Ease, the guide to a smooth and successful military transition. I am also the author of the Accelerated Military Transition course, and I have been in this space for over 20 years trying to get the conversation right about military transition, what it is and what it isn't. I'm here to tell the truth. I'm not a veteran, but I come from a long line of veterans, and I am a behavioral scientist and a master certified coach. So I bring that kind of psychosocial, behavioral angle to the topic of military transition.
Love it.
Happy to
Love
be
it.
here. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, we're super pumped to be here. A couple things, right? The audience, real quick, in case you're tuning in for the first time or you listen to our previous episodes. This conversation is for the entire Armed Forces family. This is for hiring managers. This is for HR professionals. This is for talent acquisition specialists. This is for anybody that's looking to understand the Armed Forces community and some of the challenges that they face or are facing or have faced, right? So, for today's episode, we're going to talk loosely about bridging the gap between military and civilian cultures. Undoubtedly, Emily and myself will spin off on tangents. We just talked about this in our prep meeting that we're not going to do that, but we probably still might. So just go with it, folks. Okay. But we've got some amazing content and conversations to kind of discuss. One of the first things we're going to talk about today is exiting the service before self mentality. Right? Anything you want to add specifically to that topic?
Oh, interesting. I mean, the service before self mentality is amazing. It's what allows you to be successful in the military, and it isn't really the mindset outside of the military. In the civilian work environment, it's very much self before anything. And so, in fact, I've had so many veterans tell me that, in their first weeks of work as civilians, they were just completely disillusioned because it wasn't all for one and one for all. It was, you know, I'm for me and you're for me. In terms of what can you do for me, what benefits can you give me, how can you make me engaged and be here at work. And so that's like a huge difference. Individual contribution is definitely valued over the team contribution. That's a big difference. And certainly the way your performance is assessed is very much based on your merit alone. And so, how do you balance the team ethos with the individual performer and contributor ethos? So that was just a drop in the bucket, Mike.
There you go. And just to add on to that, for folks that may not be familiar with the term individual contributor, I'll give you all some specific examples. When I was doing my first rounds of interviews many years ago, I would speak in we language. I would say, we did this, the team did this, and I wasn't focusing on my individual contributions, as Emily just kind of spoken to. And I really never heard the term individual contributor. And so, for the folks out there that don't know what that is, think of yourself as kind of like a junior enlisted person, somebody that doesn't have anybody directly reporting into their chain of command. Or if you're a newly appointed officer, right, you might be a platoon leader, you might be a first lieutenant, right, second lieutenant, maybe working in a staff position and don't have anyone necessarily directly report. You are serving as an individual contributor, meaning your body of work is going to be supporting somebody above you, right? So, those are some quick definitions for the folks at home. Okay,
Yeah,
love
great,
that.
good catch.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you talk about reframing the selfish being self-focused, right? Are there any examples where within your work where that might be tripping people up, and they still think that? Is there a way to kind of shift that mindset?
You mean they're stumbling over still having that service before self? I mean, it really frames every expectation that you have of your employers. If that is your mindset, you need to know in the civilian world, nobody else is thinking that way. Your manager is not thinking service before self. Your employees are not thinking service before self. You're not going to be rewarded This is a big one for service before self because it will be viewed as either not working smart or being a martyr or, kind of not getting it. So this is a huge mental shift, and it oftentimes feels like a real values clash to the veteran entering the civilian world. Like, wait a minute, what is happening? You guys say that you're into teams, but everybody's like watching the clock, doing their own thing, and it's just a completely different mindset, and it's going to feel weird. And just recognize this is the new world you're in. It doesn't mean that you become selfish. You you still want to be helpful and known as helpful and all of that. And you also want to be savvy by recognizing that if you lead a team, then yes, their performance will reflect on you as your performance. So it is, you do want to bring a servant leadership mentality to leading teams in the civilian world. However, your employees are not necessarily bringing that. So they may not be oriented to doing whatever it takes to get the mission done for the day. That may be like, oh heck no, I got something going on with my kids tonight. I'm out of here. So if you are able to make that mental shift, and it's nuanced, so it's going to take some time to kind of watch and learn. If you're able to do that, you're going to succeed much more quickly. If you aren't able, then you're going to be resisting it, and it's going to be very, very hard to adapt, to feel comfortable, to trust your peers. And this is why a lot of newly minted veterans hop from job to job, is because they keep looking for something better, and what they finally realize is, wait a minute, this isn't about the place, the company. It's about, this is, I guess, how it works in the civilian world. And so my mission is to accelerate that learning process so you don't have to go through 3 jobs before you realize that stuff. Does that make
It's
sense,
just
Mike? I mean, it was
yeah,
just like went
totally.
on and on.
No, it totally makes sense because as you were speaking to that, I started thinking or replaying old conversations that I've had with, field grade officers, with senior enlisted people. They'll approach me and they'll say, "Michael, you've worked in this business for a while, and Emily, I know you've had these conversations because they're in your books." Okay, and for the folks at home, right? I bring them with me wherever I go. Okay, we've got field testing, we've got Eddie. Now, real quick, it brings me back to a specific example where I was working with an O5. Okay. Said, I'm a natural leader. I've been in charge of X amount of personnel. I've done this, right? I want to be in a leadership position. And pardon my French, folks, we're going to swear on here, okay? Because we're all adults here. I go, what the fuck are you going to lead? Literally, you're coming at me in a position you want to lead something, and I respect you as your rank. I respect you as a human. I respect you as an individual, and I also respect you as somebody who just doesn't understand it yet. Okay, but at the end of the day, those are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves. What are you going to lead in? What you need to do is be successful in one given area, right? This is where we talk about the catapult philosophy, where you will regress a little bit, be the master of your own respective domain. Understand the platforms, the processes, the languages that exist within this new environment, this new ecosystem. Okay. And then you can turn on that leadership muscle, right? Go ahead. I know you've got some
Mike,
stuff. I
that
know.
is so right on, and it's so on time because I can't tell you how many veterans have said, I've been looking for jobs and everybody wants me to come in way more junior than I should be. Nobody wants to hire me at my level. And here's my answer to that. That is a gift. That is a gift because when you enter an organization as a leader, you are automatically in the spotlight because leading is a public act. Everybody can see your title. They know, and so they're watching you for that, what they expect to be, leader-like behavior. When you're new to this world of civilian leadership, because it is a totally different way of leading, you don't want to be under that spotlight while you're learning and observing and making mistakes and trying out new things and getting feedback, right? Because it is a gift to be hired slightly lower than you should be because now you've got runway to learn all that stuff you have to learn, and so that you will accelerate your upward movement probably. And once you get there, then as Mike says, you can now start to use all that good stuff that you learned in the military, but it's being translated for this new civilian context you're in. So, and it's also very smart business. You know, if a business is hiring leaders out of the military without giving them runway and training for how to lead in this environment, that's just a recipe for disaster for everybody involved. That is not good for anybody.
And I'm going to quote you, long time ago, Accenture. Okay. You said something, just because you're used to drinking from a fire hose doesn't mean you need to drink from the fire hose. Right. And that stood with me for many, many years because I was one of those ding dongs coming directly out of active duty, been a platoon sergeant, been in charge of several personnel, had worked in military recruitment, naive to think that there was some parallels there because there are none. Okay. But I felt I like, well, shoot, I've got all this experience. I should be coming in at X career level. Thank God. Thank God I did not, because I didn't understand the language, the platforms, the processes, how to even really dress within the corporate environment, because somebody, shit all over what I was wearing that day, okay, and said that I was far too dressed up for the workplace. But these are specific examples, and right, we're not trying to say this maliciously or be derogatory towards any one human being who might be thinking this way, but these are things that one should internalize. And that's why, like I said, we're using examples from our own lives, from our own experiences to help that the listeners, our folks tuning in, help them understand, hey, maybe slow it down a peg, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll tell you something. We're talking about veterans, but you know, you many new hires need to hear that because you know, my I got my start at Booz Allen training, leading new hire orientation training, and I can't tell you how many people, new hires, maybe coming from industry, maybe coming from just graduating college, top of their class, wherever they were coming to the company from, in orientation would be like, you could just feel it, like I'm coming in to storm the castle, and like, you know, I've been here 2 weeks, I can already see everything that's messed up and all the things that I needed, and I was just like, that is not going to win you any friends or influence anybody. That is just going to piss everybody off. So the company was here before you got here, it's going to be here after you leave. So slow down, listen, observe, and it's easier to do that learning and unlearning when you are not in the spotlight of a leadership position.
Absolutely. Find something else to like hit that ego button, right? Or get those words of affirmation somewhere else. But yeah, don't bring them up to to the company right away. That's probably not a
Yeah.
good look for sure.
Oh,
Well,
and can I
good.
say one more thing on that subject, which was
Yeah.
also in the post, in the newsletter post this week,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
where I always think about, you know, in the military, the expectation is that people are going to progress and succeed, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
that you're ultimately going to be sitting in your manager's chair, hopefully, which means that they will have been successful and moved up.
mhm.
Not the same in the civilian environment. I will never forget the veteran who said to me, "Oh yeah, my manager hated me from day one because when we sat down and he said, 'So where do you want to be in 3 years?' And I said, 'In your chair.'" And he looked at me like,
Bold.
"Excuse me?"
Bold move.
Uh, and you could just see, you
Mhm.
know, and ever since that day, my manager hasn't trusted me, and he's threatened by my competence and my confidence, and so I decided to just quit. Oh, that whole story didn't ever need to happen, but I've heard it so many times.
Oh gosh, wow, wow, yeah. Maybe just, think about the language we use and how that's going to land, right?
But you don't
Maybe
know what
maybe
you don't know. That's the whole thing
true.
about it.
Absolutely. That's why we're here, right? That's why we're doing this. That's why you've wrote these two amazing books, right? And that's why you have the curriculum and so many other amazing assets that are out there. But, if I were to, knowing now, if I knew then what I know now, I would say I would like to be where you're at skill wise. I would like to understand the knowledge and information you possess in 3 years. Something along those lines that doesn't come off as threatening or that you're going to be taking that human out, right? And putting them out of work. Okay. Perfect. All
Put them
right.
into a state of existential threat.
Oh my Lord. Yeah. Just constantly looking over the
He's coming for my
cold sweat.
job.
Yeah, exactly. So let's slide into our second segment, right? It's obviously sharing your experience, right? Your support, right? And how that all works. Okay. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. Okay. I've got a 78-year-old father. He's a Vietnam veteran. I grew up in a family of veterans. It's vet this, vet that, right? But that, for my father, that's his only identity. Okay. And he wears all of the Marine Corps shirts, and he wears the veteran hats, and he's got his car riddled with, medallions and lanyards. It's like he's got his own goddamn parade every time he gets in his Buick. Okay. That's fine. I love my father and I support his service, folks. But at the end of the day, as you're preparing for the transition, there's more to you than just your service. Okay. And I'm not saying we're here to change your identity or alter your identity, bust up your shadow box, delete your DD 214, tell you those things didn't happen. Okay. But at the end of the day, there's so much more life yet to live. Okay. And as we think about this, as we socialize these opportunities, I want you all to be thinking about socializing the wins that you get when you take the uniform off and how to do that. Okay, because I didn't grow up in a household where that was standard practice, right? Everybody loved telling stories about the old times and the way it used to be and what, back when things were great. Okay. Well, at the end of the day, I don't see anybody selling newspapers on the stands. No one's listening to the radio. Okay. And people are generally getting their news from information, in sources like this. Okay. So as we move into the future, I want you to socialize the right opportunity. So, Emma, thoughts on how we share our wins? What's the best way? What would you recommend, right? As a coach, as subject matter expert in all things coaching related and behavioral psychology or scientist, what do you think people want to hear?
Well, so when you're using a word that is a very corporate word. I don't know if it's used in the military, but this concept of socializing. So tell
Hmm.
me real quick, tell me and our listeners what you mean by socializing your wins, and then I'll respond to your
See,
question.
I'm getting old and I'm only using old language. See, that's what that is. When I say socialization, thank you for calling me on my shit. Okay, super important. Socialization meaning sharing across LinkedIn, sharing across your social media platforms, texting, inviting friends in, basically spreading the good word, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, for the betterment of the community. So I mean
Mm-hmm.
socializing by getting it out to the folks from the armed forces family.
I mean, I may not take this where you intend for it to go, but it's very interesting to answer your question in the context of the previous topic that we talked about, because what I've noticed in terms of the folks that I see, very active on LinkedIn, interestingly, it's almost like there's an over index to me, 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 me. Look what I did. Look what I did. Look at who I am. Look at, you know what I mean? And I almost feel like, I don't know. It's almost like some of the things that we've probably been teaching over the last 10 years about, when you meet with a civilian recruiter, you want to talk about your own personal thing, your individual contributions. So those learnings have in some ways almost been over amplified in some of what I'm seeing. Not all the time, but sometimes. So it almost looks like overconfident confidence and bragging, and that's not the right tone either. You of course want to be confident, but you don't want to be come across as overconfident,
Cocky, right?
cocky, right, or know it all or whatever. Because the fact is, the military transition can go on and on for years and years and years. It's not just your first job, your first civilian job. It's going to be, I mean, it's going to take a minute, and you're going to be learning that whole time, and some of those lessons will be hard and uncomfortable. So you don't want to overcorrect and be overconfident. I don't know. I don't know that this is even touching on what you were
Oh,
asking.
no, it absolutely is because you're exercising a little bit of humility so that way you can get the message out to the right audience, right? And then there's different things that we can share, right? Because the community, right, as we want, as Eddie's, this isn't just for the veteran transitioning. This is for the family, right? Right. So with that being said, let's take it a step further. We can share information across our socials, but let's exercise a little humility. Let's make sure that there's proof in the pudding, right? Before we go out and blast it out, right? And say, oh, you got to try this, okay? But then let's talk about how we should share our transition, either our wins or our shortcomings with the family. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, remember that, LinkedIn and Facebook, those are platforms that employers or potential employers go to learn more about you than just what's on your resume. So you want to be careful how and what you're putting out there, especially on LinkedIn. It blows my mind every day, just the poor choices people make, right? we talk.
I'm laughing because I've seen them every
You
day.
and I talk
Yeah,
about this all the time, right?
yeah.
It's like, wow, this is what you want a potential employee to see you ranting about on LinkedIn? Whoa, I would rethink that. But in terms of, you know, my body of work and my mission, which is a calling because it's not something I sought out, is to be kind of an expert on this topic and to be trying the translator between the veteran and the civilian employer and bridging that and accelerating, that successful relationship building process, is all about lifting the veil on what people don't talk about. It's telling the truth, and this is straight from my coaching background. Is secrets only grow in the shadows, and they actually shrink in the light. And when we can tell the truth about difficult things, um, we lighten our own load. And so a lot of what we do in the book At Ease and what we're hoping and in the other things that we do in the community is work with families to get a shared understanding of how hard this transition is. It's a life event. Okay? If you think about like when you first joined the military, like how much you had to learn. I mean, talk about a fire hose, right? Right? But then by the time you left the military, you were an expert, right? So the size of your learning curve now is actually just as big as it was when you joined the military. And this is what people don't know. And think of all the hardship and the mistakes and the, berating and just all of the crap that went on for you when you were first learning how to be a soldier. Um, you're kind of put back into that learning place. And if you go willingly and you have the support of your family and they understand the transition process and what you're going to be going through, then it can bring you all so close and just you can all be in it together. And that's part of the lifting of the veil is that I think what surprises a lot of veterans who read At Ease is they thought they were in it alone and they thought that it was something about them that they was causing them to struggle with the transition. And what they learn when they read the book is, oh wow, this is normal. This is actually what it's all about. Why doesn't anybody talk about this? And so that's what we're here to do is let's talk about it, and not to make it seem worse than it is, not to scare people, but to remove the stigma. And so by engaging the whole family, that's part of that.
You're spot on because, one, we've talked about this before. The transition never stops, right? Even after you land your first role or your second role, there's still going to be elements of the transition process that you'll go through. And then, we've had several candid conversations. When I chose to step away from Uber, I fell into my spiral, and you know, the biggest piece, obviously was Eddie's finding out where I'm at from an awareness perspective, but sharing my journey with my family. I think that paid dividends. I haven't even been able to recoup just yet, but I know they're there because it is the first time in my entire life to where my family and I have a completely open dialogue about how I'm doing, how I'm thinking, what I'm thinking, right? And it's the first time in years, and it's brought us closer than we've ever been, which is a wonderful experience. So if that can happen to a ding dong like me, right, a single dude with no kids, imagine opening up a little bit to your kids, to your partner, to your family unit, and how that can just remove some of those layers of anxiety, that burden. You know, you can speak much more eloquently to the how and the why that happens, but as somebody who went through it, I can tell you that it's 100% honest and truthful.
Yeah, I mean, that was the question I wanted to ask you was like, so how is it different um, dealing with these challenges, your career challenges, with this new level of support? I mean, what difference does that make for you? And what if you had
Well,
done that sooner, right?
for me, you mentioned pride earlier, right? And going at it alone. And, for a lot of us, maybe that's the way we were raised in a patriarchal household or even in a matriarchal household, right? It's, grit through it, get it done, right? And just keep moving. Um, and I thought that was normal life. I thought that was the reality. I thought I was going to have to shoulder a lot of the pain and anxieties that I was going through. But having the ability to bounce those concepts and those feelings off of other people helps normalize some of the shit that I go through on a daily basis. I can sleep better, right? I'm not boring the shit out of my therapist with the same old things, right? We talk about other things now. But honestly, I just have much more meaningful conversations with my family. Because as I look back at the friends that I've lost in service or the family members that I've lost along the way, there's dark holes in those relationships of information that I'll never be able to collect from them. Those dark holes don't exist with my current family. They know, they understand, right? And there aren't going to be those what about this or those whys, if and when I ever, those relationships end. And like I said, that's invaluable.
It's invaluable, and from a human development standpoint, from a kind of a adult development, human development, it's really, really important. It's very powerful to feel
Mhm.
known.
Yeah,
It's very
yeah.
powerful to feel seen,
Mhm.
um, and known. I sometimes
Yeah.
it's horrifying, when like you get called out on something you were doing. Ah! You saw that?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But
That's
the
all
fact
right.
is, the fact is, like, for some of us, there's this little place of shame inside us,
Mhm.
and it can get activated very easily. And when we have the courage to learn about ourselves, to know ourselves, and to let other people know us, that just kind of dissipates.
Like
You
that.
know?
I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it's
I don't
not
have to
something
feel
you got
any
to
shame
care.
about just being who I am. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's pretty cool. No, 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 you're spot on. It's actually a pretty cool feeling. And don't get me wrong, right? Listen, I've had my moment in the sun, okay, to where I've, leveraged the shit out of entitlement and I've got a lot of privilege going on. But the ability to finally understand what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling it, where it's coming from, and how to potentially maybe counter it or use it and leverage it, those are tools for the tool belt that
Oh
can
yeah.
take you through anything,
Oh
right? They
yeah, I
really
mean,
can.
and we're going to talk more about this in another episode, but this is why I became a coach, is because I myself learned by having a coach,
Hmm.
working with a coach, which I was like not having that idea. Like when my manager said, "Oh no, I'm giving you a coach," I was like, "Oh no, you're not. This is
Hmm.
not about me." But anyway, so that was my own thing.
Hmm.
But what a gift it was, and what I learned was that when I face things, when I face myself and I learn about myself, what I actually get is more choices.
Yeah.
Self-awareness leads to more choices, and as you know from reading at ease, it leads to informed decisions.
Hmm.
Whereas when we don't have self-awareness, things just happen to us, or we just do things we don't really know why, and we react,
Yeah.
and we don't have choices when we react. When we
Yeah.
react, things happen to us.
Yep. You're
Right.
absolutely. You're shooting in
So,
the
but
dark.
we're going way into things that we'll
Mhm.
talk about later. But just to put a bow on that topic.
Yeah, but I want to talk about coaching a little bit more. This is a perfect segue because
Mm-hmm.
coaching, mentoring, sponsorship, right? Those are all pieces to our next segment, right? Let's talk about coaching. Let's talk about the resources you've got that our listeners can actually take advantage of, right? We're going to do some plugs here, okay? We've got this, okay? But what
Mm-hmm.
else do we have available that's out there from a resource perspective that our folks can actually take advantage of?
Well, there's the accelerated military transition course, which is me doing my very best with 25 years of experience to do what the TAP is not doing for you. It's actually getting you ready, telling you what you're going to expect, helping you work on yourself, build that self awareness so you have more choices, make more informed decisions about jobs and, what you do, the career moves that you make, and all of that. So there's that. There's the Veteran Success Blueprint free newsletter on LinkedIn. There's a group on LinkedIn that I've been moderating for about 15 years now called the Military Transition Interest Group. You can join it on LinkedIn for free. You can, if you're an employer, you can post jobs there for free. It's got over 8,000 members now, which is a combination of recruiters, employers, and veterans
And our
trying to
amazing
find each
producer
other.
Billy is putting all these websites up
Yeah,
around here
right.
so you can
Right.
take advantage of them. Good.
Yeah, so those are ways of trying to find each other, and there are lots of groups like that on LinkedIn that you can find. But in terms of what we're offering on the website, military.grandinetta.com, there's also a free assessment you can take to start to get a handle on where you're at in this transition process. Because believe it or not, it is a thing with a beginning and an end, and it has stages, and nobody ever tells you that, and it's good to know where you're at and where you're going on that. Um, so those are some of the free resources that I can speak to. Were there others that you wanted to mention, Mike?
There's a bunch out there, folks, right? They're all Googleable, but I wanted to make sure that Emily shared hers specifically because those, in my opinion, are the best. They're the ones that I've leveraged, right? I'm a coach for a variety of different organizations, whether it be 4Block, right? My organization I work for, Vets in Tech, they have resources, but those are more almost industry focused ones, right? And if you're transitioning out, I believe in my heart of hearts that you need Emily's resources first before anything else. Okay. Because if you don't focus on what's going on internally, you're not going to be very well prepared for what you're going to do externally. Just food for thought, right? So I want to make sure that we kind of drive that home.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. I mean, just to be perfectly honest with you guys, I mean, my tagline is military transition is not about your resume.
Yeah.
Forget what they told you. In fact, I think that's the name of the second chapter in the book. Forget what they told you. Because, yeah, your resume is very important, but it is not military transition. And neither
Exactly.
is LinkedIn, and neither is job hunting or getting a
Mhm.
job. That's not military transition. So,
Yeah. And
anyway,
y'all, and I'm the SME in all of those things. Okay. So if you need, hit me up. I will help you with respect to that stuff, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
but we
Okay.
will. I mean, we are going to bring that stuff in. So,
For sure. Well, for sure. But
but from a standpoint of kind of what is my worldview, this is my worldview.
yeah, heart and brain first, okay? And then we'll
Yeah.
get to the administrative stuff for sure. For sure. Okay.
Nice.
What else you got? You got any final nuggets?
No,
Anything?
I think we could wrap this one up.
Okay.
And welcome to
Well,
the podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for reading the newsletter and for just tuning in, being part of the
ab-
conversation.
absolutely. At the end of the day, no matter what role you play in the transition process, we want to thank you for what you do. Well, transitioning
Yes.
is never easy, right? We know that. We hope that our program will help ease the burden and allow every veteran to find fulfillment in their civilian future, whatever that is. Whether you're selling, oranges on the side of the highway, painting, working in a big corporation, making kick-ass music that Emily and I can listen to. We
Yeah.
just want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Accelerator podcast, right? And then, like I said, get some books, all right? Get some readings, okay?
Sorry, I disappeared there for a minute.
It's all
Um,
good.
yeah, and know that you're not alone. You're not
Exactly.
alone. Yep.
Exactly. And we'll see you
Awesome.
next time. All right.
See you next
See
time.
y'all. See y'all.
Bye.